There's a version of you that's very good at your job. You know the software. You know the process. You know how to produce the output your team expects, at the quality they expect, in roughly the time they expect. That version of you has been getting better for years. And here's what nobody wants to say directly. That might not be enough anymore. Not because you're not skilled, but because the definition of skilled is being quietly rewritten underneath you, slowly, and then all at once. So here's the question. This video is going to answer. If the old version of competence is becoming less valuable, what's replacing it? This is specifically for you if you're in your 20s or early 30s, somewhere in the middle of building a career. Not at the beginning, not at the top. You've put in real time. You've gotten good at things that were genuinely hard to get good at. Writing, analysis, coding, design, research, client work, whatever your domain is. And now, you're watching AI tools do passable versions of those things in seconds. Maybe you've told yourself it doesn't matter, that AI is a tool, not a replacement, that your experience still counts. That might be true. But the version of that story most people are telling themselves is incomplete. Because the threat isn't that AI does your job. The threat is subtler. It's that the skills that used to signal competence are losing their signal value, and something else is taking their place. And most people are still practicing the old signal. In the 1980s, being good with spreadsheets was a career differentiator. Seriously. If you could build a clean financial model in Lotus 1-2-3, you were valuable in a way that was visible and scarce. Companies paid for it. Promotions reflected it. Then, spreadsheet fluency became universal. And it stopped being a differentiator. It became a floor. Something everyone was assumed to have. The skill didn't disappear. It just stopped being the thing that separated people. That transition took about 15 years. It was gradual enough that most people didn't feel it happening. 1 year, you were good at spreadsheets. A few years later, everyone was, and nobody cared anymore. What's happening right now is the same mechanism, but the category of skills being commoditized is much broader, and the timeline is much shorter. Writing a clear paragraph, summarizing a document, producing a first draft of almost anything, pulling together research, writing basic code. These are becoming the new spreadsheet fluency. They're moving from differentiator to floor. That's the context. Now let's get into what's actually happening and why. There are 4 steps to how this works. I want to go through each one carefully, because understanding the mechanism is what lets you respond to it intelligently. Step 1. AI raises the floor on execution. Every knowledge worker has 2 kinds of work. There's execution, producing the output, and there's judgment, deciding what the right output is, and whether this particular output is good. For most of history, execution was expensive. It took time, effort, skill. So a lot of energy went into getting faster and more accurate at execution. AI changes that equation directly. The cost of execution, drafting, formatting, coding, summarizing, translating, is collapsing. What used to take an hour can take 10 minutes. What used to require significant skill can now be done by someone with almost no background. Think of a junior marketing hire in 2019 versus 2025. In 2019, writing a solid blog post was a skill test. In 2025, generating a decent draft takes 90 seconds. The execution floor has risen. Anyone can produce the artifact, which means execution is no longer where the value lives. Step 2. Judgment becomes the scarce resource. Now that everyone can execute quickly, what separates people is whether they can tell the difference between a good output and a mediocre one, and why. This sounds simple. It isn't. Judgment in this context isn't taste or opinion. It's structured discernment. It's being able to say, this draft is technically clean, but it's solving the wrong problem. This analysis is accurate, but it's missing the assumption that changes everything. This design is usable, but it won't work for this specific user. That capacity doesn't come from practicing execution. It comes from something else, from having thought deeply about the domain, from having seen enough failure to know its early signatures, from caring about the right thing rather than the legible thing. Here's the concrete example. Two analysts, both using AI to run the same market research. Both get similar outputs. One reads it, nods, and sends it upstream. The other reads it and says, "Wait." This is comparing companies across different fiscal year structures, so the margin comparison is misleading. We need to adjust for that. Same tool, completely different value produced. The difference is judgment, and AI doesn't raise the floor on judgment the way it raises the floor on execution. If anything, it makes judgment rarer, because people who over-rely on AI output stop building the mental models that make judgment possible. Step 3. Over-reliance creates a hidden skill debt. This is the part most people aren't talking about. When you use a tool to do something you used to do manually, you maintain the output, but you stop building the underlying capacity. You still get the spreadsheet, but you don't sharpen the mental model of what the numbers mean. This is already visible in a specific pattern. People who've been using AI writing assistants heavily for a year are faster at producing drafts, but some of them are slower at constructing an argument from scratch because they've been outsourcing the part of writing that builds that muscle. This isn't a reason to stop using AI tools. It's a reason to understand what you're outsourcing and what that costs you over time. The risk isn't the single draft. The risk is cumulative. If you consistently delegate the hard cognitive step, the structuring, the reasoning, the discernment, you gradually lose access to the capacity. The skill debt builds quietly, invisibly, until the moment you need to operate without the tool and can't. Think about GPS navigation. Most people who use it heavily have degraded spatial reasoning for navigation. That's fine. Most of the time, you have GPS, or until you don't. The question for your career is, which cognitive capacities are you navigating with AI right now? And what happens if the GPS goes away? Step 4. The new competence signal is integration, not output. Here's where it comes together. The old competence signal was, can you produce the thing? Can you write the report? Can you build the model? Can you ship the feature? That signal is going quiet, not because the output doesn't matter, but because almost everyone can produce the output now. The new signal, the one that's becoming legible to the best managers, organizations, and collaborators, is, can you integrate? Integration means something specific here. It means, can you take AI output, human input, messy context, and incomplete information, and produce something that's actually right for this situation? It's not a creative skill or a soft skill. It's a systems skill. It requires holding the full problem in mind while evaluating a partial solution. It requires knowing what questions to ask. It requires judgment about when the fast answer is good enough and when it's dangerously wrong. The person who has this skill looks different from the person who doesn't, in ways that are increasingly visible. Now that you understand this mechanism, here's why that matters for how you're spending your working hours right now. Picture two people, same role, same tools available. The first person has adapted to AI the obvious way. They use it constantly, they've gotten faster, they produce more, their output volume has doubled. They feel productive, but they've quietly optimized for speed over depth. They review AI output quickly. They trust the clean-looking answer. They've stopped doing the slow thinking that used to happen during the execution process because the execution is now instant. 3 years from now, they're efficient, but they can't tell you why something is wrong until after it's failed. They struggle when problems are genuinely novel. They've become, without meaning to, dependent on AI filling the gaps their judgment used to fill. Now the second person. same tools, same speed advantages, but they use them differently. They use AI for execution, but they stay in the judgment layer. When AI produces a draft, they interrogate it, not to be contrarian, to understand whether it's actually right. They still do slow thinking. They still reconstruct things manually sometimes, not because it's faster, but because it keeps the underlying model sharp. That person, 3 years from now, can do something increasingly rare. They can operate well, even when the tool is wrong. They can catch the quietly misleading output. They can solve the problem AI can't frame correctly, because they've maintained the capacity to frame it themselves. You're building toward one of those two futures right now. Not dramatically, just one small habit at a time. Here's the mental model. Think of your cognitive skills the way you'd think about physical fitness. Some exercises you do, because they're functional, they let you do the task. Some exercises you do, because they build underlying capacity. They make you better at a range of future tasks. AI tools are very good at handling the functional part. They can produce the output. They can execute the task. What they can't do is build your underlying capacity. That still requires effortful cognitive work. It still requires the slow, uncomfortable process of thinking something through without the fast answer. So the reframe is this. Stop measuring your AI use by output volume. Start measuring it by cognitive maintenance. Ask yourself, at the end of a working day, did I do enough slow thinking today to maintain the judgment I'll need when the fast answer is wrong? Not every day needs to be deeply effortful. But if you go weeks without doing hard cognitive work in your domain, if every problem is solved with an AI assist, every draft is generated before you've thought about structure, you're withdrawing from a capacity without depositing back into it. The habit is simple to describe and easy to skip. Once a day, spend time with the hard version of a problem before you reach for the fast version, not to be slow, to stay sharp. That's it. One habit. But it runs against the grain of every incentive in your work environment right now, because the fast answer is always available and always looks fine. So here's the answer to the question we started with. What's replacing the old version of competence? Not creativity, not communication, not the list of soft skills you'll find in a LinkedIn article. And something more specific, the capacity to exercise judgment on AI-assisted work, to know when the output is good, when it's subtly wrong, and why. That capacity is built through sustained, effortful thinking. It atrophies through over-delegation. One sentence. The new professional edge isn't using AI better than everyone else. It's maintaining the judgment that AI can't replace, while everyone else quietly loses it. But here's what that raises, and what we haven't answered yet. Judgment comes from somewhere. It comes from domain knowledge, yes. But it also comes from feedback, from failure, from time spent with hard problems. And if AI is now handling most of the hard problems, where does the next generation actually build judgment in the first place? That's a structural problem that goes well beyond individual habits. And it's what we're going to look at next.